I learned very early that love in my family wasn't something you simply received, it was something you had to earn. And no matter how hard I tried, I was always just short of whatever invisible standard existed in our house. My sister, Alina, never had that problem. Everything about her seemed to shine brighter in my parents' eyes. Her laughter filled rooms, her complaints demanded attention, and her smallest desires turned into urgent priorities. If she wanted something, it was discussed, planned, and eventually handed to her like it had always belonged to her. New clothes, expensive gadgets, courses she lost interest in after a few weeks. It didn't matter. My parents always found a way. I told myself it was because she needed more. That was the explanation I clung to as a child. She was more emotional, more expressive, more sensitive. I was the quiet one, the calm one, the one who didn't make trouble. I thought being easy to handle meant being appreciated. I was wrong. Being easy meant being ignored. I remember one birthday so clearly it still stings when I think about it. I had turned 16. It wasn't a big number to anyone else, but to me, it felt important. I didn't ask for a party or expensive gifts. All I wanted was to feel seen, even just for a day. That morning, my mother rushed past me with barely a glance. My father was already busy on a phone call. There was no happy birthday, no smile, no acknowledgement that the day was different. I waited. I told myself they were planning something. Maybe they were pretending to forget so they could surprise me later. I held on to that hope the entire day, carrying it like something fragile in my chest. By evening, I realized the truth. They hadn't forgotten on purpose. They had just forgotten. 2 days later, they threw a small celebration for Alina because she had done well on a test. There was cake, decorations, laughter. I stood in the corner, smiling when expected, clapping when everyone else did, and feeling something inside me slowly quiet down. That was the first time I understood what it meant to disappear in your own home. As I grew older, the pattern didn't change. It only became clearer. Alina got new clothes every season. I got whatever no longer fit her. She complained about brands. I learned to be grateful for fabric. She got rides everywhere. I walked or took buses. She was comforted when she failed. I was expected to succeed without support. And when I did succeed, it barely made a ripple. I worked hard in school because it felt like the only thing I could control. Late nights, early mornings, extra effort no one saw, it became my routine. I chased perfect grades like they might unlock something. Like they might finally make my parents look at me the way they looked at her. The day I brought home top marks, I stood in front of them, heart racing, waiting. "That's nice," my father said, not even lifting his eyes fully from the television. My mother smiled faintly before turning back to Alina, who was complaining about something trivial, but somehow urgent enough to take over the entire room. I stood there for a few seconds longer than I should have, holding the paper in my hand, hoping maybe they'd ask more, say something else. Anything. They didn't. I went to my room and placed the result sheet in a drawer, realizing that my achievements were something I celebrated alone. Over time, I stopped expecting reactions. But I never stopped feeling the absence of them. The thing about being overlooked is that it doesn't always break you loudly. It doesn't shatter you in obvious ways. Instead, it slowly reshapes you. It teaches you to stay quiet, to need less, to take up as little space as possible so you don't become a burden. That word, burden, was never said directly to me, but I felt it in the pauses, in the sighs, in the way my needs were always met with hesitation, while Alina's were met with urgency. "You're strong," my mother would say whenever I handled something on my own. I used to feel proud of that. Later, I realized it wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse. A way for them to give less without feeling guilty. Strength in our house meant you didn't get help. It meant you didn't get attention. It meant you didn't get chosen. By the time I reached my final year of school, I had learned not to ask for anything unless it was absolutely necessary. Even then, I prepared myself for disappointment. Still, a small part of me held on to hope. I thought maybe something big, something undeniable, would finally change things. That something came in the form of a university acceptance letter. When I opened it, my hands were trembling. I had worked for this for years. Every late night, Every sacrifice, every moment of pushing myself beyond exhaustion, it all led to that single piece of paper. I had been accepted into one of the best universities in the country, with a partial scholarship. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to open a door I had only dreamed about. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel excited. I walked into the living room where my parents and Alina were sitting. My heart was beating so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I got in, I said, unable to hide the smile in my voice. I got into the university I applied to. They gave me a scholarship too. For a moment, I waited for everything to change. My mother glanced at the letter briefly, then nodded. That's good. That's good. My father leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. How much is the scholarship? I told him. He frowned, doing quick calculations in his head. That still leaves a lot. I can work, I said quickly. I'll manage most of it. I just need some help to get started. There was a pause. It wasn't long, but it felt heavy. We're already paying for Alina's course. My mother said, her tone final. You'll have to manage the rest yourself. I blinked, trying to process her words. Alina's course. The same course she had already dropped twice. The same one she complained about constantly, the same one she barely took seriously. But this is different, I said softly, not even sure what I was trying to prove anymore. This is my future? And this is hers too, my father replied. We can't do everything. Something about that sentence settled deep inside me. Not because it was harsh, but because it was honest. They couldn't do everything, so they chose where to give. And they never chose me. That was the moment the last piece of hope I had quietly disappeared. Not in anger, not in tears, just gone. I stood there for a few seconds, nodding as if I understood, as if this was reasonable. As if it didn't confirm everything I had been trying not to believe. Then I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't feel shocked. I just felt clear. For years, I had been trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided where I stood, and no matter what I did, I would always come second. That night, I made a decision that didn't feel dramatic or brave. It felt necessary. I stopped trying to be chosen. Because for the first time, I understood something that changed everything. I was never overlooked by accident. I was simply never their first choice. I left home quietly, the way I had learned to do everything. No arguments, no dramatic goodbyes, no last attempt to make them understand. I packed my things into 2 worn-out bags, folded my clothes carefully, and took only what I truly needed. There were no childhood items worth carrying, no memories I felt desperate to hold on to. Just essentials, documents, and a version of myself that was tired of waiting to be seen. When I walked out the door, no one stopped me. My mother was in the kitchen, focused on something that didn't include me. My father barely looked up. Alina was scrolling through her phone, laughing at something on the screen. I paused for a second, just long enough to notice how ordinary the moment felt to them. I'm leaving? I said. My voice didn't shake. Okay. My mother replied absent-mindedly, as if I had said I was stepping out for a few hours. That was it. No questions. No hesitation. No take care. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and realized something strange. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. The world outside wasn't kinder, but at least it was honest. It didn't pretend to love me while quietly choosing someone else. University hit me hard from the very beginning. The excitement I had carried with me faded quickly under the weight of reality. Tuition fees, rent, food, books, everything came with a price, and most days, I had no idea how I was going to keep up. The scholarship helped, but it wasn't enough. So I worked. My first job was at a small cafe near campus. Early morning shifts before classes, late evenings after lectures. I stood for hours, smiling at strangers, memorizing orders, pretending I wasn't exhausted. The pay wasn't much, but it was something. When that wasn't enough, I picked up a second job. Data entry for a small company that didn't care when the work got done, as long as it did. That meant long nights, staring at a screen until my eyes burned, fingers moving automatically while my mind drifted somewhere between focus and complete exhaustion. Sleep became a luxury. There were days I barely had time to eat, grabbing whatever was cheapest and fastest. Instant noodles, bread, sometimes nothing at all. I learned how to stretch a small amount of money into survival. I learned how to ignore hunger, how to push through fatigue, how to keep going even when my body begged me to stop. No one was there to catch me if I fell, and somehow that made me stronger. Classes were another battle entirely. Surrounded by students who seemed more prepared, more supported, more confident, it was easy to feel out of place. They talked about their families, their plans, their safety nets. I had none of that. What I had was determination. I sat in the front rows, took detailed notes, asked questions even when my voice felt small. I stayed after lectures, used every available resource, and studied harder than I ever had before. Not because I was naturally brilliant, but because I couldn't afford to fail. Failure wasn't just a bad grade for me. It was losing everything I had fought to build. There were nights when the pressure became too much. I would sit on the floor of my tiny room, back against the wall, and feel the weight of everything pressing down on me at once. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the quiet ache of knowing that no one was waiting for me to come home. Sometimes I would pick up my phone, scrolling through contacts, staring at my parents' names without calling. Not because I expected help, but because a small, stubborn part of me still hoped they might care enough to ask how I was doing. They never did. Days turned into months and months into years. Slowly, things began to shift. I got better at balancing everything. My body adjusted to the lack of rest. My mind became sharper under pressure. What once felt impossible started to feel manageable. I made small changes. Found slightly better jobs. Learned how to budget more effectively. Discovered which professors were supportive, which opportunities were worth chasing. And for the first time in my life, I started seeing the results of my own effort. Not ignored, not dismissed. Recognized. One professor noticed my work and encouraged me to apply for an internship. I hesitated at first, convinced I wasn't good enough, but I applied anyway. I got it. That internship turned into experience. Experience turned into confidence. Confidence turned into opportunities I never thought I would have. When I graduated, I didn't just pass, I excelled. Standing there, holding my degree, I felt something I had never truly felt before. Pride. Not the kind that comes from someone else's approval. The kind that grows quietly inside you when you know exactly what it took to get there. My parents weren't get there. I hadn't invited them. Not out of anger, but because I no longer needed them to witness my achievements for them to matter. After graduation, I got my first real job. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. A routine, a future, a life that belonged entirely to me. I moved out of my cramped room into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every little detail, it all came from my effort. There was no one to compare me to, no one to overlook me. Just me, standing in a space I had created from nothing. Work became my focus. I showed up early, stayed late, learned everything I could. I didn't rely on luck or connections, I relied on consistency. And it paid off. Promotions came slowly at first. Then faster. My confidence grew with every challenge I overcame. The girl who once questioned her worth became someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. I stopped shrinking myself. I stopped waiting for permission to take up space. Somewhere along the way, I also stopped looking back. My phone stayed quiet, and I stopped expecting it to change. Birthdays passed without messages. Achievements came and went without acknowledgement. At first, it hurt. Then it didn't. Because I realized something important: closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from acceptance. Acceptance that they were never going to be the people I needed. Acceptance that I had already become everything I once wished they would help me be. Years passed like that, quietly, steadily, without drama. Until one day, everything shifted again. I was sitting in my office, focused on work, when my phone lit up on the desk beside me. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers didn't usually bring anything good. But something made me glance at the screen, and then I froze. It wasn't unknown, it was my mother. For a second, I just stared at her name, my mind strangely blank. There was no rush of emotion, no sudden wave of longing or anger. Just curiosity. After all these years, after all that silence, why now? The phone kept ringing. the sound cutting through the quiet of the room. I let it ring longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but because I realized something important in that moment. I had a choice. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting. I was the one being reached for, and that changed everything. I picked up the phone, my voice calm, steady, and unfamiliar even to myself. "Hello." The silence on the other end lasted only a second. But it was enough to tell me everything had changed. Because this time, they needed me. "Your sister is in trouble." The words landed without impact, like something I had already heard 100 times before in different forms. There was no urgency in my chest, no instinct to panic, no immediate pull to fix anything. Just a quiet awareness that this was exactly the kind of call I had always known would come one day. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my tone calm, almost detached. On the other end, my mother hesitated, as if she wasn't sure where to begin or how much to admit. That alone told me more than her words ever could. "It's complicated," she said finally. "She made some mistakes. Got involved with the wrong people. There are debts." Of course there were. Alina had always lived as if consequences were something other people dealt with. For years, my parents had protected her from every bad decision, every reckless choice, every moment where reality should have caught up with her. Now it finally had. "How much?" I asked. There was another pause, longer this time. When she told me the number, I didn't react out loud. But inside, something shifted, not shock, not even anger, just a quiet confirmation of everything I had already understood. It was a mess. A serious one. "We've done everything we can," my mother continued quickly, her voice tightening. "We used our savings. We tried to handle it ourselves, but it's too much. We can't manage it alone." I could almost picture her as she spoke, pacing, anxious, trying to hold everything together the way she always had when it came to Alina. Only this time, it wasn't working. "And you want me to step in?" I said. It wasn't a question. "You're her sister," she replied, as if that explained everything. Before I could respond, another voice cut in. "Family helps family." My father. His tone was firm, familiar in a way that immediately pulled me back into the past. For a second, I could almost feel that old version of myself, the one who tried to be understanding, the one who stayed quiet, the one who accepted things without question. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. I straightened slightly, grounding myself in the present. "Family," I repeated, letting the words settle between us. "That's interesting." "This isn't the time for sarcasm," my father snapped. "Your sister is in serious trouble. We need to act quickly." "We." I noticed that. Not you, not her. We. As if I had always been part of the equation. As if I hadn't spent years building a life completely separate from theirs. "I'm listening," I said, not because I was agreeing, but because I wanted to hear exactly how far this would go. "She needs financial help," my mother said, her voice softer now, almost pleading, just enough to stabilize things. "Once she gets back on her feet, she'll figure it out." I almost smiled at that. Alina had been getting back on her feet her entire life. "And what happens after that?" I asked. "What do you mean?" my father replied, irritation creeping into his tone. I said slowly, "what stops this from happening again?" Silence. Not the kind filled with thought, the kind filled with avoidance. "There's no time to overthink this," my mother said quickly. "We just need to get her out of this situation first. Of course. Fix the problem, ignore the pattern." That had always been their way. I let out a quiet breath, my fingers resting lightly against the edge of my desk. I wasn't angry. That surprised me more than anything. I had imagined this moment before, in different ways. I thought I would feel something stronger, resentment, maybe even satisfaction, but all I felt was clarity. "I can't help," I said. The words were simple, steady, final. For a moment, there was no response. Then everything changed. "What do you mean you can't?" my father demanded, his voice sharp. "You have a good job. You're doing well for yourself. Don't pretend you don't have the means." "I didn't say I don't have the means," I replied calmly. "I said I can't help." "Don't play with words," he snapped. "This is your sister." I let that sit for a second. "My sister?" I repeated quietly. "The one you chose every single time." That has nothing to do with this. My mother said quickly, her tone defensive now. Why are you bringing up the past? Because the past never left. Because it shaped everything about this moment. Because it was the reason I wasn't immediately saying yes. It has everything to do with this, I said. You're asking me to take responsibility now, but where were you when I needed support? That's not fair. My father cut in. We did what we could for both of you. I almost laughed. The audacity of that statement was almost impressive. You didn't, I said simply. You made choices. And those choices were very clear. My mother's voice softened again, shifting tactics. We're not talking about the past. We're talking about your sister's future. She's struggling. She needs help. Don't you care about her at all? That question lingered for a moment. Did I care? The answer wasn't simple. I care, I said honestly. But caring doesn't mean fixing everything? Then what does it mean? My father challenged. It means understanding that people have to face the consequences of their actions. I replied. Just like I had to. That's different, he said immediately. Why? I asked. Neither of them answered. Because there was no answer that didn't expose the truth. Because deep down, they knew exactly why it was different. She made mistakes. My mother said finally, her voice breaking slightly. Everyone does. That doesn't mean she deserves to suffer like this. I closed my eyes for a brief second. I thought about all the times I struggled alone. All the moments I needed help and was told, directly or indirectly, to figure it out myself. Did I deserve that? Or was it just easier for them? I'm not punishing her, I said quietly. I'm just not stepping in. That is punishment, my father insisted. You're turning your back on your own family. No. I was doing the opposite. I was finally standing in a place where I could see everything clearly. I'm not responsible for the consequences of her choices, I said. And I'm not responsible for the way you raised her. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with something sharper than anger. Disbelief. How can you be so selfish? My mother whispered. There it was. The word I had expected from the beginning. Selfish. I let it settle over me, examining it from a distance. For years I had given without being asked, adjusted without being thanked, stayed quiet to keep the peace. And now, the first time I said no, I was selfish. I'm not being selfish, I said calmly. I'm setting a boundary. A boundary, my father scoffed. This isn't some small disagreement. This is a crisis. Yes, I said. And it's not mine. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. You'll regret this, my mother said, her voice cold now. One day you'll need us, and we won't be there. I almost responded, almost pointed out that they had never really been there to begin with. But I didn't. Because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I won't, I said quietly. And I meant it. There was nothing left to argue. No misunderstanding to clear up. No hidden truth waiting to be revealed. Everything was exactly as it had always been. The only difference was me. I wasn't the same person who would bend, justify, or sacrifice herself to maintain a relationship that had never been balanced. I had built something of my own. A life. A sense of self. A foundation that didn't depend on their approval. And I wasn't going to risk that, not for guilt, not for pressure, not for a version of family that only reached for me when they needed something. I have to go, I said, my voice steady. You can't just walk away from this. My father snapped. But I already had, years ago. This isn't me walking away, I replied. This is me staying where I belong. Before they could respond, I ended the call. The silence that followed felt different from the one before. Lighter. Cleaner. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, waiting for something, regret, doubt, second thoughts. None came. Instead, there was something unfamiliar but undeniable. Peace. Not because the situation was resolved, but because, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself without hesitation. And I wasn't going to apologize for that. They didn't stop after that call. If anything, my refusal only made them more persistent. At first, it was more phone calls. I ignored most of them, letting the screen light up and fade out without touching it. When I did answer once or twice, it was always the same conversation, different words, same pressure. Just think about it. Don't be heartless. We're running out of options. Each time, I gave the same answer. calm, firm, unchanging. No. Eventually, the calls turned into messages. Long paragraphs filled with guilt and urgency, sent at all hours of the day. My mother's texts were emotional, almost desperate. She described Alina's situation in painful detail, emphasizing how scared she was, how things were getting worse, how I was the only one who could help. My father's messages were different, shorter, sharper. You're making a mistake. This will come back to you. Family is everything. Remember that? I read them all. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to respond immediately, or at all. It wasn't that their words didn't affect me. Some of them did. There were moments when I paused, when doubt crept in quietly, whispering that maybe I was being too harsh, too distant, too different from who I used to be. But then I would remind myself of the truth. Every time I needed support, I was told to handle it on my own. Every time I struggled, I was expected to be strong. Every time I felt unseen, I was told it wasn't a big deal. So why was it suddenly my responsibility to fix everything now? The answer was simple. Because I could. And because they were used to taking without asking what it cost me. Weeks passed like that, an uncomfortable mix of silence and pressure. Then one evening, everything shifted again. There was a knock at my door. It was unexpected enough that I hesitated before answering. I wasn't waiting for anyone, and I rarely had unannounced visitors. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something told me I shouldn't. When I opened the door, I froze. Alina stood there. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked completely different, but because something about her presence had changed. The confidence she used to carry so effortlessly was gone, replaced by something quieter, more uncertain. She wasn't dressed the way she used to be. No carefully chosen outfit, no attention to detail meant to impress. Just simple clothes, slightly worn, like she hadn't thought much about how she looked. Her eyes met mine, and for once, there was no expectation in them. No assumption that I would fix things. "I didn't think you'd actually say no," she said. Her voice was softer than I remembered. I leaned against the doorframe slightly, studying her. "I've said no my whole life," I replied. No one just listened. She didn't argue. That alone caught me off guard. In the past, Alina would have pushed, insisted, turned the situation into something dramatic. She would have made it impossible to ignore her. Now she just stood there. "I know," she said quietly. The silence that followed felt different from any silence we had shared before. It wasn't filled with tension or competition. It was honest. "Can I come in?" she asked after a moment. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't sure what this meant. Letting her in felt like opening a door to something I had worked hard to close. But I stepped aside anyway. She walked in slowly, looking around my apartment as if she was trying to understand something she had never seen before. "This is nice," she said, almost to herself. I didn't respond. She sat down carefully, like she wasn't sure if she belonged there. For a while, neither of us spoke. I watched her, noticing the small things I might have missed before. The way her hands rested in her lap. The way her shoulders seemed slightly tense. The way she avoided meeting my eyes for too long. This wasn't the sister I grew up with. Or maybe it was. Just without the protection she had always relied on. "I messed up," she said finally. I nodded slightly. "I know." She let out a small, humorless laugh. "Of course you do. They probably told you everything." "Enough," I said. She looked down at her hands. "I thought they would fix it," she admitted. "Like they always do." There was no bitterness in her voice. Just realization. "They tried," I said. "I know," she replied. "But this time it's too big." The way she said it made something shift inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. For the first time, she was facing something she couldn't escape from. And she didn't know how to handle it. "I didn't come here to ask for money," she said after a pause. That surprised me. "Then why did you come?" I asked. She took a deep breath, as if the answer wasn't easy. "Because I didn't know where else to go." The honesty in her voice was unfamiliar. Alina had never been someone who admitted uncertainty. She had always moved through life with the assumption that things would work out in her favor. Hearing her say that felt like seeing a completely different side of her. "I thought they loved me more," she continued, her voice quieter now. That's what it always felt like. I didn't interrupt. I thought it meant I mattered more, she added. But now I think they just made things easier for me, and harder for you. Her words settled between us, heavy and undeniable. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms, not defensively, but to steady myself. They didn't make it easier, I said. They made it different? She looked up at me, confusion flickering across her face. How? They removed consequences, I explained. And that doesn't make life easier. It just delays reality. She was quiet for a moment, processing that. And you? She asked. What did they do to you? I thought about that for a second. They gave me nothing, I said simply. So I had to figure everything out on my own. She nodded slowly, as if that made sense in a way she had never considered before. I don't need you to fix anything, she said. I just didn't want to be alone. That was the moment everything shifted for me. Not because she asked for help, but because she didn't. Because for the first time, she wasn't standing in front of me as the golden child who always got her way. She was just a person. Someone who had been shaped by the same family, but in a completely different way. I could have turned her away, closed the door, protected my peace, and kept everything exactly as it was. And part of me wanted to. But another part, the part that had learned strength the hard way, understood something deeper. Strength isn't about becoming cold. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to allow something different. You can stay for a while, I said. Her eyes widened slightly surprised. Not to hide, I added. Not to avoid your problems. But to figure out what you're going to do next. She nodded quickly. I understand. I'm not fixing this for you, I continued. Whatever happens, you deal with it. On your own? I know, she said. And if you stay here, I added, things are different. No shortcuts, no expectations. She let out a small breath, something almost like relief. Okay. For the first time, there was no tension between us. No competition, no resentment. Just two people sitting in the same room, trying to understand what came next. And as I looked at her, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel weak for letting her in. I felt stronger. Because this time, the choice was mine. My parents never understood what changed. Even after everything, after the calls, the arguments, the silence that followed, they still held on to the same belief that had shaped our entire lives, that I owed them something simply because we were family. At first, they kept trying. The messages didn't stop immediately after I refused to help. If anything, they became sharper, more pointed, like they were trying to break through a wall they didn't realize I had already built years ago. You've changed. We don't recognize you anymore. This isn't who you are. I read those words more than once, not because they hurt, but because they revealed something important. They were right. I had changed. I was no longer the version of myself who stayed quiet to keep the peace, who accepted less to make others comfortable, who believed that love meant sacrifice without limits. I didn't reply to those messages. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I no longer felt the need to explain myself to people who had never really tried to understand me in the first place. Eventually, the messages slowed. Then they stopped. The silence that followed wasn't heavy the way it used to be. It didn't carry guilt or uncertainty. It felt settled, like something that had finally reached its natural conclusion. I didn't chase after it. I didn't try to fix it. Because for the first time, I understood something clearly. Closure doesn't come from getting the answers you want. It comes from no longer needing them. Life moved forward, steady and unshaken. Having Alina in my space was an adjustment at first. We had never really existed together without the constant presence of comparison, expectations, or tension created by our parents. Without that, there was an unfamiliar quiet between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable, it was just new. She kept her distance in the beginning, almost like she was afraid of crossing a line she didn't fully understand yet. She woke up early, helped around the apartment without being asked, and spent most of her time looking for ways to fix the situation she had created. I noticed everything, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that allowed me to see her clearly, without the filter of the past. She made calls, asked questions, tried to negotiate. Tried to understand things she had never had to deal with before. There were moments when frustration showed, when she seemed overwhelmed, when it would have been easier for her to fall back into old patterns and expect someone else to take control. But she didn't. That mattered more than anything she could have said. One night, I found her sitting at the small table in the living room, papers spread out in front of her, her expression tight with focus. "I think I can handle part of it," she said when she noticed me. "Not everything, but something." I nodded, leaning slightly against the wall. "That's a start," I replied. She looked up at me, something thoughtful in her eyes. "Is this what it felt like for you?" she asked. "Figuring everything out alone." I considered the question for a moment. "Yes," I said. "But I didn't know I had a choice." She nodded slowly, as if that difference meant more than the words themselves. "I used to think you were just distant," she admitted. "Like you didn't care about anything." I almost smiled at that. "I cared," I said. "I just learned early that it didn't change anything." She looked down at the papers again, her expression softening. "I wish I had seen that sooner." "Maybe. But it wouldn't have changed what we went through." "We were raised in the same house," I said. "But we didn't grow up the same way." She didn't argue. Because now, she understood. Days turned into weeks and slowly things began to shift, not just for her, but for us. Our conversations became easier, less guarded, more real. There were no dramatic apologies, no sudden emotional breakthroughs that erased the past. Just small moments of honesty that built something new, piece by piece. She found a job. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but she stuck with it. She started managing her responsibilities without waiting for someone else to step in. And for the first time, I saw her not as the person who had everything handed to her, but as someone who was learning what it meant to stand on her own. As for me, my life didn't stop or revolve around any of this. I continued working, growing, building everything I had already started. My routine remained steady, my focus clear. I didn't lose myself trying to fix anyone else. That was the difference. I helped where I chose to, but I didn't carry what wasn't mine. Every now and then, I would think about my parents. Not with anger, not even with sadness. Just with a kind of distant understanding. They were still the same people. Still holding on to the same patterns. The same beliefs, the same need to control and define what family meant on their terms. I didn't expect them to change anymore. And because of that, I wasn't disappointed when they didn't. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. It had been a while. For a moment I considered ignoring it. But I opened it anyway. "We hope you're doing well." That was it, no accusations. No pressure, no demands. Just a simple sentence. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, something quiet settling in my chest. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was different. I didn't respond immediately. Not out of hesitation, but because I didn't feel the urgency anymore. I placed the phone down and continued with what I was doing, letting the message sit without letting it take over my thoughts. Later that evening, I picked it up again and typed a short reply. "I am." Nothing more. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was honest. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Weeks passed and life continued to move forward in ways that felt steady and real. Alina eventually found her own place. It was small, not particularly impressive, but it was hers. The day she moved out, she stood by the door for a moment, looking at me like she wanted to say something, more than what words could easily carry. "Thank you," she said finally. I nodded. Not because I needed the gratitude, but because I understood what it meant for her to say it. "You'll be okay," I said. This time, it wasn't reassurance, it was belief. After she left, the apartment felt quiet again. But not empty. I stood there for a moment, looking around the space I had built, the life I had created from nothing but determination and quiet resilience. And I realized something important. I hadn't just survived everything that came before. I had grown beyond it. The girl who once waited to be chosen no longer existed. In her place stood someone who understood her own worth, who didn't measure her value through someone else's attention, who didn't need to fight for a place where she was never meant to belong. My parents still didn't fully understand me. Maybe they never would. But that no longer mattered, because understanding from others is not what defines you. Knowing yourself does. I moved forward without looking back, not because I was running from the past, but because I had finally made peace with it. The life ahead of me was mine. Not shaped by favoritism, not limited by neglect, not controlled by expectations that were never fair to begin with. I became everything they never expected me to be. Not because they believed in me, but because they didn't. And in the end, that made all the difference. Because the daughter they overlooked didn't stay invisible, she became unstoppable.